of Teck was born on the 26th of May 1867 in Kensington Palace. She was the only daughter of Prince Francis, Duke of Teck, and Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge, a granddaughter of George III of the United Kingdom. Mary was born in the same room as her cousin Queen Victoria had been over 48 years earlier. Her parents named her after Queen Victoria, with Mary's first name actually being Victoria. Mary was the eldest of 4 children and had a happy but strict upbringing. She learned to be discreet, firm and tactful in order to resolve her 3 brothers' arguments. The children played with the children of the Prince of Wales, who were close in age to them. Mary and her family lived in Kensington Palace and White Lodge, granted to them by the Queen. While her brothers were educated at boarding school, Mary was educated by her mother and governess at home. Her parents were not wealthy and often lived abroad with a small staff to economize. Mary grew to be fluent in English, German and French. In 1885, Mary and her family returned to London. By this time, Mary had become her mother's unofficial secretary and helped her mother to organize parties. In 1886, Mary debuted in society, and being the only unmarried British princess who was not a descendant of Queen Victoria, made her a desirable candidate for Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, the eldest son of the Prince of Wales. In 1891, Albert proposed to Mary and she accepted. Unfortunately, Albert Victor died only weeks later of pneumonia. Albert's brother George, Duke of York, became close to Mary and proposed to her in 1893. That same year, in July, the couple were wed. They were deeply in love with each other and were never unfaithful. They had 6 children together: Edward, Albert, Mary, Henry, George and John. The couple lived in York Cottage and in St. James's Palace. They led a simple, quiet life. Their children were cared for by a nanny, which was normal for upper-class families. However, the nannies they hired ended up abusing the children and were promptly fired. Eventually, the affectionate and much-loved Charlotte Bell was hired as the children's nanny. Mary and George were quite distant and cold towards their children, but they did love them very dearly. As Duke and Duchess of York, the couple carried out a variety of public duties in support of the Queen. On the 22nd of January 1901, Queen Victoria died, and Mary's father-in-law ascended the throne as Edward VII. For the rest of 1901, George and Mary toured the British Empire, something no royal had ever done before. The King and Queen took care of their children while they were away. In November, George was created Prince of Wales with Mary as Princess of Wales. They moved into Marlborough House. On the 6th of May 1910, Edward VII died and George became George V, with Mary as his Queen Consort. Mary decided to drop her first name and became known as Queen Mary. She was the first British Queen Consort to be born in Britain since Catherine Parr. On the 22nd of June 1911, the King and Queen were crowned together in Westminster Abbey, and on the 12th of December 1911, they were crowned Emperor and Empress at the Delhi Durbar in India. While Mary and her mother-in-law Queen Alexandra were on friendly terms, Alexandra was stubborn and demanded that she take precedence over Mary at the funeral of Edward VII. She also kept some of the royal jewels, which should have passed on to Mary as the new queen. During the First World War, Mary instituted austerity measures at the palace. Food was rationed and she visited wounded and dying servicemen in hospitals. In 1917, the royal house's surname was changed to the English-sounding Windsor, as anti-German feeling ran high in Britain. 2 months after the war, Queen Mary's youngest child, John, died at the age of 13. His death caused immense shock and sorrow for his parents. The couple became closer, and Mary continued to be of great support for her husband in the later half of his reign. She offered him much advice and was a calming presence for the king. From the late 1920s, George fell ill numerous times with lung problems. Mary nursed him when he was sick. In 1935, George V celebrated his Silver Jubilee and paid tribute to his wife in his speech. On the 20th of January 1936, George V died. Their eldest son, Edward, ascended the throne as Edward VIII. Mary was then known as just Queen Mary. By the end of the year, Edward had abdicated, and Mary's second son, Albert, had ascended the throne as George VI. Mary was supportive of her son, Edward, but could not understand why he would neglect his duties and abdicate. Mary took a keen interest in the upbringing of her granddaughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, the only children of George VI. She took them on excursions in London to art galleries and museums to compensate for their lack of an educational regime. During the Second World War, George VI wanted his mother to evacuate from London, and while she was hesitant to do so, she decided to live at Badminton House in Gloucestershire, the home of her niece, the Duchess of Beaufort. During the war, she visited troops and factories and directed the gathering of scrap materials. After the war, in June 1945, Mary returned to Marlborough House. Mary was an eager collector of objects and photos that had a royal connection. Most of the time, she obtained the objects by paying for them. On other occasions, she would express a desire for someone's possession and expect that that person would give it to her. In February 1952, the king died. By this point, half of her children were dead, with her son George having died in 1942 during an air crash. Her eldest granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, ascended the throne as Queen Elizabeth II. Little over a year later, Mary died on the 24th of March 1953 in her sleep. Before her death, she had let it be known that the coronation should not be postponed should she die beforehand. Her body lay in state at Westminster Hall before she was buried beside her husband at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle.